My son-in-law branded me a disease that had destroyed their lives, right in the middle of a family barbecue in my own backyard. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. He seemed to have forgotten, conveniently, that I was the one making his mortgage payments. I'm glad you're here to listen to my story. The humid summer air was thick with the familiar, comforting scent of charcoal-grilled burgers and sweet corn as I carefully arranged a stack of paper plates on the old patio table. At 62 years old, I still found a deep sense of pride in hosting these family get-togethers. They were the small, essential moments that I believed held us together, a tether against the pull of our increasingly busy lives. My backyard was modest, nothing you'd see in a magazine, but I'd spent the entire morning making sure it was perfect for them. The flowers in their pots were freshly watered and vibrant. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and a sense of peaceful order settled over the space I'd prepared for my family. "Dad, where do you want these?" Michelle, my daughter, called out as she emerged from the house, her arms laden with bags of ice. "In the big cooler by the grill, sweetheart," I replied, instinctively smoothing down the front of my polo shirt. Even now, at 40 years old, Michelle still possessed that same bright, boyish smile that was a perfect echo of her mother's. I watched her for a moment as she crossed the lawn to where Steve, her husband of 15 years, was standing with his back turned pointedly toward me. They had, as was their custom, arrived late, but I had long ago learned that mentioning it only made things worse. Steve's perpetually rigid posture and the thin, tight smile he offered whenever he had to greet me spoke volumes. It was a language of tolerance, not affection. I had come to terms years ago with the fact that we would never have the close father and son relationship I had once foolishly hoped for. As I turned to head back into the kitchen to grab the potato salad, I heard Steve's voice, sharp and laced with disdain, drift across the yard. He must have thought I was already inside, well out of earshot. "It's always the same tired routine with him," Steve said, his tone cutting through the cheerful afternoon atmosphere. "These forced family gatherings, as if we're under some sacred obligation to show up and pretend we're the picture-perfect happy family." Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog began to bark. I froze where I stood, my hand resting on the handle of the screen door. "Honey, keep your voice down," I heard Michelle warn him in a hushed tone. "Why should I?" "It's the absolute truth," Steve retorted, his voice growing louder with defiance. "He's been the plague that ruined our lives. Always hovering, always needing to have an opinion about every single thing we do, always holding that damn money over our heads." A sudden weakness flooded my knees. The money. He meant the mortgage payments I had been faithfully making on their house for the last 8 years. He meant the substantial down payment I had scraped together by selling my late wife's vintage jewelry collection, the one precious thing she had asked me to keep safe for our daughter. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Michelle saw me first, and I watched the color drain completely from her face. Steve followed her horrified gaze and had the decency to look startled, but there was no trace of shame in his eyes. "Arthur," he started, then faltered, clearly realizing there was no way to smooth over the words I had so clearly heard. An abrupt, heavy silence descended upon the patio. My sister-in-law, Diane, suddenly found something fascinating at the bottom of her beer bottle. Her husband, Jason, became intensely preoccupied with adjusting his sunglasses. My 2 grandchildren, Emily and Thomas, blissfully unaware of the crushing tension, continued their gleeful game with the lawn sprinkler. "The plague that ruined your lives?" I repeated, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the violent trembling in my hands. "So that's what I am to you." Michelle took a hesitant step toward me. "Dad," he didn't mean. I heard exactly what he meant. I said, my gaze cutting her off before she could finish. I looked directly at Steve, whose chin was now lifted in that familiar, defiant posture of his. The plague that ruins your lives has been paying the mortgage on your house for 8 years. But you don't need to worry. I won't be ruining your lives for much longer. I set the large bowl of potato salad down on the table with deliberate care, turned my back on them, and walked straight through the house. I grabbed my wallet and keys from the small table in the hallway and stepped out the front door to my car. I didn't let myself cry until I was safely inside with the doors locked. And then, like a dam bursting, the tears came in great heaving sobs that I muffled against the steering wheel. For a full 30 minutes, I just sat there, waiting, hoping for Michelle to come after me, to apologize, to say anything at all. No one came. When I finally put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of them all, still gathered in the backyard, the barbecue smoke still rising into the air as if I had never been there at all. Back at my own house, I moved through the empty, silent rooms like a ghost. I'd lived in this small ranch house since before Michelle was even born. After my wife Jane passed away 20 years ago, I'd had countless opportunities to downsize and move somewhere smaller, but I'd always kept it. I told myself that Michelle might need it someday, that my grandchildren deserved to have a place with a big yard to play in when they came to visit. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my eyes fixed on the wedding photograph on my nightstand, Jane's confident, radiant smile, my own hopeful eyes. We had been so young then, so absolutely certain that our love would be enough to conquer anything. "What would you do, Janie?" I whispered to her smiling image. The silence in the room stretched out around me, broken only by the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall. I had given everything I had to build and support this family. My youth, my savings, my own quiet dreams of traveling the country after retirement. All of it had been sacrificed on the altar of my belief that family always came first. And now, as I sat alone in my quiet bedroom while they continued their party without me, I finally allowed myself to wonder if I had been terribly, devastatingly wrong all along. 3 long days passed before my phone finally rang. 3 days of suffocating silence, punctuated only by a single text from Jason asking if I was okay. I hadn't replied. When Michelle's name finally illuminated my screen, I just stared at it for 5 full rings before I could bring myself to answer. "Dad," she said, her voice tight and strained. "Steve wants to apologize." Not, "I want to apologize." Not, "I'm so sorry I didn't defend you." "Steve wants to apologize." "Does he now?" I said, my own voice feeling hollow and distant. "He was just having a bad day. You know how he gets when he's stressed about money." I closed my eyes, a vivid memory surfacing from the depths of my grief. The day Jane died, Michelle had been 20, just halfway through her degree at the state university. I'd been 42, a sudden widower with a mortgage, half our previous income, and a daughter who still depended on my support. I had gone back to my job at the factory the day after the funeral, taking on every extra shift I could get, relentlessly determined that Michelle wouldn't have to drop out of school. "Dad, are you still there?" "I'm here," I said, pulling open the drawer of my desk where I kept all my important documents. "Michelle, do you remember when you and Steve wanted to buy that house? The one you're living in right now?" She hesitated. "Of course I do. And do you remember what the bank told you?" Another long pause. "They said we didn't qualify for the loan." "And what did I do then?" "Dad, this isn't—" "What did I do, Michelle?" I pressed, my voice firm. She sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "You put down $50,000 for the down payment, and you co-signed the loan." "I didn't just co-sign," I corrected her. "I'm the primary borrower." The house is legally in my name because your credit was so terrible back then. I pulled out the most recent mortgage statement, though I already knew the numbers by heart. I've been making the payments every month for 8 years. That's over $150,000. We've been going through a rough patch, she said defensively. Steve's business isn't doing as well as he'd hoped, and the kids just need so much these days. I thought about my grandchildren, Emily and Thomas, 8 and 6. Sweet, wonderful kids. I hadn't seen them in almost a month before that disastrous barbecue, even though they lived only a 20-minute drive away. Remember when you called me at 2 in the morning because Steve's car had broken down and you needed $4,000 for a new transmission, Dad? Or when Thomas needed braces and your insurance wouldn't cover the full cost? Or when Emily wanted to start piano lessons? Are you keeping score? Is that what this is really about? Her voice now had that sharp, critical edge to it, the one that sounded so much like Steve's influence. No, it's not about keeping score, I said, closing the desk drawer. It's about respect, Michelle. It's about a little bit of appreciation. So, we should just bow down and thank you every single day because you helped us out? Is that what you want? For us to feel indebted to you for the rest of our lives? Her words struck me like a physical slap. That's not what I meant at all. Steve was right. You do hold that money over our heads. I thought of Douglas, my oldest friend, who had tried to warn me years ago. You're raising a daughter who thinks she's entitled to your help, Arthur, he'd said after I paid off Michelle's credit card debt for the 3rd time. I had vigorously defended her then, telling Douglas that he just didn't understand our situation. Now, listening to my daughter on the phone, I wondered if I had been the one who never truly understood. I never once asked for gratitude, I said finally. Just a little bit of respect. Well, I'm sorry if you don't feel respected, Michelle said, her tone making it painfully clear that she wasn't sorry in the least. But Steve's under a lot of stress with his business, and the kids are always needing something, and we're drowning here, Dad. I instantly recognized the familiar turn in the conversation, the subtle, practiced shift from accusation to desperate need. This was the dysfunctional pattern we had established years and years ago. Michelle would make me feel guilty, and then she would present me with a problem that only I could solve with my checkbook. How much? I asked, the question almost automatic after so many years. What? How much do you need this time? There was a brief pause on her end. Then, $8,000. Just to catch up on some bills. We'll pay you back, I promise. It was the exact same promise she had made dozens of times before. I closed my eyes and could almost hear Jane's gentle voice in my ear. You can't pour from an empty cup, Artie, she used to say. I'd been pouring from an empty cup for so long, I had completely forgotten what it felt like to be full. I need some time, I said at last. Time? Dad, these bills are due now. I need time to think about everything, about this relationship, and about what it's costing me. Cost? Is that all we are to you? A cost? Her voice rose, thick with indignation. We're your family, Dad. Your only family. Those words hung in the air between us, heavy with accusation and years of manipulation. Family. The word that had been both my anchor and my chain for so long. I have to go, I said, a sudden profound exhaustion washing over me. Dad. I hung up the phone before she could say another word, before she could pull me back into the toxic cycle we'd been repeating for far too long. Family was supposed to lift you up, not drain you completely dry. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that simple truth. The morning after my conversation with Michelle, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of old photo albums. There were pictures of Michelle as a toddler, grinning with a missing front tooth, her high school graduation, her wedding day with Steve, his smile tight and forced even then, Christmases, birthdays, family vacations. A lifetime of moments I had treasured, believing with all my heart that they were the building blocks of a loving, supportive family. How could I have been so blind? My phone buzzed with a text from Douglas. "Coffee today?" Douglas had been my friend for over 30 years. Ever since we'd worked on the same assembly line at the auto plant. He'd seen me through Jane's death, through Michelle's turbulent teenage years, through everything. And he had tried, in his own quiet way, to warn me. An hour later, we were sitting in his sun-drenched enclosed porch, steam rising from our coffee mugs. "I've been worried about you," he said, studying my face intently. "Jason told me what happened at the barbecue." I stared out at his meticulously kept garden. "Did you know all this time? Did you know how they really felt about me?" Douglas's silence was answer enough. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice cracking. He sighed. "I tried, Arthur. God knows I tried. Remember 3 years ago when you paid for their massive kitchen renovation?" I remembered it all too well. $30,000 that I had taken directly from my retirement fund. "I told you then that they were taking advantage of you," he continued. "And you said I was being paranoid, that Steve was just misunderstood." I finished for him, the memory making me cringe. "I said Steve was just misunderstood. You wanted so badly to believe they appreciated you," Douglas said, reaching across the table to give my hand a firm squeeze. "You just didn't want to see the truth." I thought back to that kitchen renovation. Steve had shown me their elaborate plans: granite countertops, custom-built cabinets, a high-end wine fridge, things I had never dreamed of having in my own modest kitchen. When I had hesitantly suggested something a bit more modest, he had looked at me with such profound disappointment. "Michelle said you were excited to help," he'd said, "but if you can't afford it." Of course, I'd written the check the very next day. "When was the last time they invited you over for dinner?" Douglas asked me now. "When was the last time Michelle called just to check on you, not to ask for money?" I couldn't remember. The realization settled in my chest like a cold, heavy stone. "They visit on holidays," I said weakly. "Which holidays?" he pressed gently. "Christmas, when you give them expensive gifts? Thanksgiving, when you cook the entire meal by yourself?" I looked down into my coffee cup, no longer able to meet his compassionate gaze. "Arthur," Douglas said softly, "you deserve so much better than this." After leaving Douglas's house, I found myself driving past Michelle and Steve's home. The sprawling 2-story colonial sat impressively on a corner lot in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the flower beds meticulously maintained by a professional landscaping service that I also paid for. I slowed my car as I approached, noticing Steve's new SUV parked in the driveway. It was another emergency I had helped fund 6 months ago when his old car had suddenly been deemed unsafe for the children. As I watched, Steve emerged from the house, dressed in crisp golf whites, his blonde hair perfectly styled. He was laughing into his phone as he got into the SUV. He didn't have a care in the world. This was not the behavior of a man who was drowning in bills and suffocated by stress. Something cold and hard settled in the pit of my stomach. I pulled away before he could notice me. That evening, I sat down at my computer and opened my online banking records. For the very first time, I forced myself to see the undeniable truth laid out in stark numbers. Over the past decade, I had given Michelle and Steve more than $300,000, and that didn't even include the ongoing mortgage payments. $300,000 of my retirement, my security, my entire future gone. And for what? To be called a plague. My phone rang, displaying Michelle's number. I let it go straight to voicemail. A text message followed immediately. "Dad, did you think about what we talked about? The bills are due on Friday. Not, "How are you?" Not even a token apology. Just another demand. I set the phone down on the table without responding. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my doorbell rang. Michelle stood on my porch, her expression a carefully constructed mix of concern and impatience. "Dad, are you okay? You didn't answer my calls." "I'm fine," I said, making no move to invite her in. She shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other. "Look, about the other day, Steve feels really bad about what happened." "Does he?" I asked, my voice flat. "Or do you just need that money?" Her face hardened. "That's not fair, isn't it? Dad, we're really in a tight spot here. The property taxes are due, and Emily needs a new laptop for school." "And Michelle?" I interrupted. "When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for money, not to ask me to babysit, just to check on your father." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "That's not. We've been busy. Too busy to call your father, but not too busy to ask for $8,000. Her face flushed with color. "If you're trying to make me feel guilty, I'm not trying to make you feel anything," I said, suddenly feeling bone-tired. "I'm just stating the facts." We stood there in a heavy silence, the weight of years of unspoken truths hanging between us. "So, you're not going to help us?" she finally asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "I didn't say that. I said I needed time." "We don't have time, Dad. The bills are due Friday," I said. "Yes, you mentioned that." She ran a frustrated hand through her hair. "I don't know what you want from me." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised, and felt a profound, overwhelming sadness. "That's exactly the problem, Michelle. You don't know what I want. You've never bothered to ask." I closed the door gently in her face and leaned against it, listening as her footsteps retreated down the path. The next morning, I made a decision. Instead of answering the increasingly desperate texts from Michelle, I called my bank and made an appointment with a financial advisor. It was time to understand exactly where I stood. Mr. Thompson, the advisor, a kind man named Mr. Reynolds, said, reviewing my accounts with a deepening frown, "Your retirement savings are significantly below where they should be for someone your age." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I've had some family expenses." He showed me the projections on his computer screen. At my current rate of spending, I would completely run out of savings within 5 years of retirement. The massive mortgage payments on Michelle's house were draining my accounts each month like a slow, unstoppable bleed. "Do you have any other assets?" he asked. "Just my house," I said. "I own it outright." "Well, that's something," he said encouragingly. "But Mr. Thompson, I have to be honest with you. You need to make some significant changes if you want to have any kind of financial security in your retirement." I left the bank with a tight knot in my stomach and a folder full of grim financial projections. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and called the mortgage company that held the loan on Michelle's house. "I'd like to understand my options," I told the representative after confirming my identity. "If I wanted to remove myself from this mortgage, what would that look like?" "The other borrowers would need to qualify for the loan on their own, or they'd need to refinance," she explained patiently. "And if they don't qualify, then the property would typically go into foreclosure unless the payments continued to be made." I thanked her and hung up, my hands trembling slightly. Michelle and Steve would never qualify for that loan on their own. Their credit was still poor, and Steve's business, a small consulting firm that seemed to constantly need just a little more investment, barely broke even. I drove to the county clerk's office next. I needed to understand my exact legal obligations. What I found there only confirmed what I already suspected. The house was primarily in my name, with Michelle and Steve listed only as secondary owners. I had been the one to sign the vast majority of the paperwork, with them merely adding their signatures at the very end. On the way home, I drove past their house again. This time, I noticed a lawn sign for a landscaping company I didn't recognize. Had they finally started paying for their own lawn care? Then I spotted the pool company truck parked in their driveway. A pool? They were having a pool installed when they claimed they couldn't even pay their bills? I pulled over a block away, my heart pounding in my chest. Through a small gap in the hedge, I could see workers digging in their backyard. Steve was standing with a man in a suit, both of them examining what looked like blueprints. A hot wave of pure anger washed over me. $8,000 for emergency bills, while they were planning a luxury swimming pool. When I got home, I called my longtime friend Roberta, who happened to be a real estate attorney. "Arthur, it's been too long," she said warmly when she answered. "How are you?" "I need some legal advice," I said, getting straight to the point about the house I owned with my daughter. 20 minutes later, I had a much clearer picture of my situation. Because my name was on both the deed and the mortgage, I had certain rights, but also significant liabilities. If I simply stopped paying the mortgage, it would destroy my own credit rating. "You essentially have three options," Roberta explained. "Continue paying and maintain the status quo, force a sale of the property, or have your daughter and son-in-law refinance without you. And if they can't refinance, then you're back to options 1 or 2. I thanked her for her advice and hung up, my mind racing. I needed more information before I could make a decision this monumental. My phone buzzed with another text from Michelle. "Dad, please. We really need your help. Steve is really stressed about these bills." I set the phone down without responding. The Steve I'd just seen examining pool plans hadn't looked stressed at all. That evening, I called Jason, my sister-in-law's husband. He had always been closer to Michelle than I realized, often hearing things I didn't. "Arthur," he said, obviously surprised to hear from me, "are you okay after the barbecue? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," I said. "Has Michelle said anything to you about having financial problems?" There was a long pause. "What kind of financial problems?" "She says they're drowning in bills, that they need $8,000 urgently." Jason's silence spoke volumes. "Jason, please, I need to know the truth." He sighed heavily into the phone. "Arthur, they just put a down payment on a pool. $15,000. Steve's been showing everyone the designs. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. When? Last week. Steve said it was an early anniversary present from you." I closed my eyes, letting the sheer magnitude of the lie sink in. They weren't just taking advantage of me. They were actively lying about me, using my name to fund their luxuries. "Arthur, are you still there?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Thank you for telling me the truth." After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled out the folder from the bank. The retirement projections stared back at me, a stark and terrifying reminder of what my future would look like if I continued down this path. I opened my laptop and began making a comprehensive list of every single dollar I had given Michelle and Steve over the years. Every loan that was never repaid, every emergency that required my financial intervention, every extravagance they disguised as a necessity. By midnight, I had a detailed spreadsheet that told the sordid story of a decade of systematic financial abuse. I had been played for a fool, but no more. The next morning, I called my bank and scheduled another appointment with their mortgage specialist. Then I called a real estate agent I trusted. It was time to take back control of my life, my finances, and my future. 1 week after my visit to the bank, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by a fortress of documents, mortgage statements, bank records, retirement projections, the entire paper trail of my years of sacrifice and their years of exploitation. I had spent the past week in a whirlwind of meetings with financial advisors, real estate attorneys, and mortgage specialists. I understood my situation with crystal clarity now, and I had made my decision. When the doorbell rang that evening, I was ready. I gathered the documents into a neat folder and went to answer it. Michelle and Steve stood on my porch, both of them looking more agitated than concerned. Steve's arms were crossed tightly over his designer shirt, his foot tapping impatiently on the welcome mat. Michelle held her phone in her hand, as if she were ready to show me something, probably more bills they couldn't pay. "Dad?" Michelle started, her voice already edged with frustration. "You haven't been answering our calls or texts for over a week. What's going on?" "Come in," I said calmly, stepping aside to let them enter. They exchanged a wary glance before walking into my living room. Neither of them sat down. "We're in serious trouble, Dad," Michelle said, cutting straight to the point. "The bank is threatening to foreclose." I raised an eyebrow. "Which bank?" "The mortgage is with Summit Financial, and I've made every single payment on time." Michelle blinked, caught completely off guard. "I meant our credit cards. We're maxed out, and they're threatening to take legal action." "How much do you owe?" I asked. "About $30,000, she admitted, looking down at her shoes. "And you need me to pay it?" Steve stepped forward. "Arthur, I know we had a misunderstanding at the barbecue, but this is serious. We could lose everything." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated. "You called me a plague that ruined your lives. Was that a misunderstanding?" Steve had the grace to look uncomfortable for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "I was stressed. I say things I don't mean when I'm stressed. Like when you told Jason that the new swimming pool was an early anniversary present from me." The color drained from Steve's face. Michelle looked between us, utterly confused. "What swimming pool?" she asked. I turned to my daughter, watching as the painful realization slowly dawned on her face. "You didn't know?" I asked quietly. "About the $15,000 down payment last week. He said his parents helped with that." Michelle stammered, turning to face Steve. Steve's face hardened. "My parents wouldn't give us a dime, and you know that. So you lied to me." Michelle's voice rose. "We're drowning in debt, and you put down $15,000 on a pool? We deserved something nice for once," Steve snapped back. "Do you know how hard it is to be the only family in the entire neighborhood without a pool? Do you know what people think? I just watched them argue as if I weren't even in the room." This was their dynamic. Steve pushing for more, Michelle weakly objecting before ultimately giving in, and then both of them coming to me with their hands outstretched. "Enough," I said finally. They both turned to look at me, momentarily united in their surprise at my firm, commanding tone. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the couch. "Both of you." They sat, looking like two scolded children. I placed the folder on the coffee table between us and opened it to reveal the documents inside. "For the past 10 years, I have given you over $300,000, I began, my voice steady and clear. "That doesn't include the mortgage payments I've been making on your house. That's another $150,000. Michelle started to speak, but I held up my hand to silence her. "I'm not finished. I've paid for renovations, cars, vacations, private schools, and countless so-called emergencies. I have drained my retirement savings to fund your lifestyle, and in return, I've been treated like an ATM at best, and a plague at worst." Steve's face flushed with anger. "Is this why you called us here? To throw your generosity in our faces?" "No," I said calmly. "I called you here because this ends now." I slid a document across the table toward them. This is a statement showing that I've made the final mortgage payment on your house. As of today, I am no longer making any payments." Michelle's eyes widened in panic. "But we can't afford." "I'm aware," I interrupted, "which is why I've also filed the necessary paperwork to put the house on the market." "You can't do that," Steve exploded, jumping to his feet. "It's our house. Actually, it's primarily my house," I corrected him. "My name is first on both the deed and the mortgage. I've consulted with attorneys and I have every legal right to force a sale." Michelle's face had gone completely pale. "Dad, please, where would we live?" "That's for you to figure out," I said, my voice softer but still firm. "You're 40 years old, Michelle. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet." "You cold-hearted," Steve hissed, his mask of politeness completely gone now. "After everything we've done for you?" I laughed, a short, humorless sound. I was genuinely amused. "What exactly have you done for me, Steve? Please enlighten me." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to name a single thing. "We're family," Michelle said weakly, her last resort. "You can't just abandon us." "I'm not abandoning you," I replied. "I'm refusing to enable you anymore. There's a profound difference." "So that's it?" Steve's voice rose hysterically. "You're throwing us out on the street because of one little comment?" "No, Steve. I'm taking back control of my life because of years of disrespect and financial abuse. The comment at the barbecue was just the final straw." Michelle stood up, desperation shining in her eyes. "Dad, please, we can work something out. I promise we'll change." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised and loved and sacrificed everything for, and I felt a strange mixture of deep sadness and exhilarating liberation. "I hope you do change, Michelle, but not for me, for yourself." Steve grabbed his jacket, his face contorted with fury. "You'll regret this when you're old and alone with no one to take care of you. You'll regret this." I met his gaze steadily. "I'd rather be alone than be used." Michelle looked torn, caught between her husband's rage and her own shock. "The real estate agent will contact you tomorrow to arrange for viewings," I said. "When the house sells, you'll receive 20% of the proceeds. That will be enough for a security deposit and the first month's rent on an apartment. The rest is going back into my retirement fund." "This isn't over," Steve spat as he stormed toward the door. "Michelle, come on." Michelle hesitated, looking at me with pleading eyes. "It's time to grow up, Michelle," I said gently, "for both our sakes." As the front door slammed shut behind them, I sank down into my armchair, suddenly feeling the weight of the last decade lift from my shoulders. The house felt emptier than before, but also lighter, freer. I had done what I needed to do. Now I just had to be strong enough to see it through. 1 year later, I stood on the small wooden deck of my coastal cottage, watching the sunset paint the ocean in brilliant shades of gold and pink. The salt-laden breeze tugged at my hair, which I now wore shorter, free of the dye I'd used for years. At 63, I had finally stopped trying to look younger for everyone else and had started living for myself. The 6 months that followed my confrontation with Michelle and Steve had been the hardest of my life, harder even than when Jane died. At least back then, I'd had a clear purpose: raising Michelle, preserving our family. This time, I had to learn who Arthur Thompson was when he wasn't someone's husband, or someone's father, or someone's financial safety net. The sale of their house had gone through more quickly than I had expected. The real estate market was hot, and the house, with its premium location and the half-finished pool that had to be filled in, sold for well above the asking price. As I had promised, I gave Michelle and Steve 20% and put the rest directly into my depleted retirement fund. They had been furious, of course. Steve launched a campaign of whispered rumors among our mutual acquaintances. painting me as a heartless father who had abandoned his family in their time of need. Some people believed him. I lost friendships I had thought were solid. For a while, I questioned myself daily, wondering if I had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. But slowly, I had rebuilt my life. First, I sold my old house. It was too big, too full of fading memories. I found this peaceful little cottage, a world away from my old life, but close enough to maintain the friendships that had weathered the storm. It was just far enough to start fresh. Behind me, the screen door creaked open. "Tea's ready," Douglas called, carrying 2 steaming mugs out onto the deck. He had been my rock through it all, never judging, always supporting. "It's beautiful tonight," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "It always is," I replied, accepting the warm mug gratefully. We sat in comfortable silence for a long while, watching the sky deepen from pink to a rich, velvety purple. This was one of the many gifts of my new life, the ability to simply be without constantly attending to someone else's wants and needs. "Have you heard from Michelle?" Douglas asked eventually. I nodded. "She called yesterday." After 3 months of angry silence following the sale of the house, Michelle had finally reached out. The initial conversation had been awkward and strained with unspoken emotions, but it had been a start. Over the past 9 months, we had slowly, carefully begun rebuilding our relationship, not as it had been, with me as the ever-giving father and her as the ever-taking daughter, but as something new, something healthier. "She and Steve separated," I said, the words still feeling strange on my tongue. Douglas raised his eyebrows. "Really? When?" "About a month ago. She's been staying with a friend from work. After losing the house, they had moved into an apartment they could barely afford. Without my financial support, Steve's spending habits had quickly become unsustainable. The arguments had started almost immediately, Michelle had told me, with Steve blaming her for not standing up to me, and her finally seeing him for who he truly was. "She asked if she could come visit this weekend," I added. "And what did you say?" "I said yes," I replied, smiling at Douglas's concerned look. "Don't worry, we're not going back to the way things were. She knows that." In our recent conversations, Michelle had begun to show glimmers of the daughter I had raised before Steve. Before the entitlement, before the years of endless taking, she was working 2 jobs now, living in a modest apartment, and finally learning the value of earning her own way. She had apologized, not just once, but repeatedly, for everything she had put me through. I wasn't naive enough to think one apology could erase years of toxic behavior, but I was hopeful enough to believe that people could change if they truly wanted to. "I'm proud of you, Arthur," Douglas said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I know how hard this past year has been," I squeezed back, grateful beyond words for his unwavering friendship. The hardest things are often the most necessary. After Douglas left, I sat alone on the deck, watching the stars emerge one by one. I thought about the Arthur I had been just a year ago, depleted, taken for granted, terrified to rock the boat, and I marveled at how far I had come. I had started woodworking again, a hobby I hadn't touched since Michelle was born. My cottage walls were now decorated with hand-carved shelves and small, intricate sculptures. Each one was a testament to my rediscovered creativity. I had joined a local history book club and made new friends who knew me simply as Arthur, not as someone's father or benefactor. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my financial security. With the proceeds from both house sales and careful, mindful budgeting, my retirement was now solid. I would never be wealthy, but I would be comfortable, able to live out these golden years entirely on my own terms. My phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. "Looking forward to this weekend. I have some good news to share." I smiled as I typed back. "Can't wait to hear it. drive safely. Our relationship was different now, more balanced, more honest. She came to me for advice sometimes, but never for money. We were learning how to be a father and daughter again, without the toxic dynamics that had poisoned our bond for so long. Steve still refused to speak to me, but that was his choice. I had made my peace with the fact that some relationships can't be salvaged, and, more importantly, shouldn't be. Inside my cottage, I moved through the small, cozy rooms that I had decorated exactly as I wanted, without considering anyone else's preferences. On my bedside table sat a framed photo of Jane, and alongside it, a newer one of Michelle and me, taken at Christmas, our first holiday together after the fallout. Her smile had been tentative, mine cautious, but we had been trying, and that was what mattered. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror and paused. The man looking back at me was older, yes, with lines that told the story of both joy and heartbreak. But there was something else in his eyes, too. A quiet strength, a hard-won wisdom. "You did it," I whispered to my reflection. "You built a house for yourself, not for anyone else." And this house, this life, was finally, truly mine. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.